Welcome to another episode of From Garage to Growth, the podcast where we explore the transformative power of entrepreneurship. And in today's episode, we are venturing into the exciting world of African entrepreneurship with Startup Lounge Africa, a management consulting firm dedicated to bridging the gap between Africa and European businesses. And today our guest will be Samuel Opoku, the founding partner and CEO of Startup Lounge Africa. We will share his vision for an Africa brimming with opportunity, where businesses can thrive and collaborate across continents. So to kickstart things off, I would like to give you the opportunity to just introduce yourself and just let the audience know who you are.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Samuel. Usually I actually introduce myself mostly as a management consultant, but I do really wear a lot of hats, to be honest. And that's probably not the only thing I do. In general, I would say I'm definitely an African enthusiast and activist in a way. My work has always been really focused on building bridges between Africa and the rest of the world. And so be it in management consulting, be it in tech consulting, these are some of the things I've been doing. I was born in Ghana, of course, now moved here in Germany for the past 4 years. Definitely still I'm not used to the code. So like going back anytime I get the chance. So I mean, in general, I just became actually, so this is something I'm really proud of. I just became a father of twins, last year. Thank you. So 2 girls. And for me, I think it's really shaping my understanding of myself and how I introduce myself moving forward.
Congratulations on the kids.
Thank you.
How are the journey?
Telling you. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to kickstart the questions themselves. Samuel, what could you share about the founding vision and mission of Startup Lounge Africa? And how does it align with the broader goal of empowering businesses in Africa and in Europe?
Yeah. So in general, when we was heading the startup unit by then, and what actually happened was I had run a few projects around, supporting startups, internationalization of startups. And one of the things that became very interesting for me was we were running projects that were focused mostly on a specific time period, a specific budget. And so there's a lot that you couldn't do. Yeah. And you didn't have a lot of wiggle room just because of the way certain things were structured. So I personally thought to myself, if I really wanted to go ahead and do more, I needed to do it in my own terms. So this is literally the story behind Startup Lounge Africa. The idea started off from, we really wanted to go beyond the first stage of supporting startups through a program, but really do the entire full length of follow-on support. We launched in 2019 and the goal was, we wanted to launch and then we do this thing we call 54 days across Africa. So 54 days across Africa was more or less our in into the market to basically interact with all the 54 countries across, the continent. Well, I mean, it sounds really interesting and nice, but it was hell trying to do this thing, because at the end of the day, we are trying to do it on a daily basis, without breaks. So we did West and East Africa, and the team broke down, to be honest. I personally got sick for some time, so we had to just, pause it. But that actually gave us a really good understanding of the market. We got to interact with a lot of startups, early stage, mid stage, looking for funding. Ideally, the goal was really to just give them that level of visibility, because if you even don't have visibility, then funding is also another topic that you probably can't even reach at the moment. So we really approached it from a visibility perspective. We did a lot of, ecosystem reporting here and there, gave the startups we interviewed a lot of, visibility. And we actually even went ahead to also put them in front of investors at the time. So I remember we had so many different people coming on board. You may know some of them from Founders Factory Africa, some of them from Dream VC. Mark especially was a really good friend. So this is how we actually began, and this is how we started. we got to the point where after doing all this, there was really no money, because no startup had enough money to actually pay for anything you wanted to do for them. We wanted to do a lot. And so the idea of supporting startups still stays. But what has really happened over the past few years has been we've moved a bit into supporting grown-ups or the dinosaurs, as you may put it, so that we can have the monetary capacity to move back and then think about how we support the startup ecosystem. So Startup Launch Africa has really gone through different phases, but really when it comes to the idea behind it, this was the motivation.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, Africa is such a big continent. And you spoke about your challenges that you faced. In your experience, what are the key challenges that startups in Africa face? And how does Startup Launch Africa address those challenges?
I think to be honest, the main key thing we always sort of alluded to and still allude to is just the lack of access. Really. It's just the lack of access to everything, really. Because if you look at the entire spectrum of building a business, money is one thing, of course. But if you do not have access to market, access to a certain network that allows you to push whatever it is you need to push, access to just mentors, advisors, all those different things. So I think it has improved a lot over the past years, but there's still so much gap that's still missing. There's a missing gap. So for us, we bring it down to access, and then every other thing falls within that lack of access, bit. So this is how we define sort of the challenges for startups, and even in general for us as well. So the way we tend to approach this is we want to be able to provide this access, right? And so at Startup Launch Africa, the goal really is now, even though we are working a lot of the time with grown-ups, so European-based businesses that are trying to do something across Africa, we always tie the work into working with, hey, if you're coming in, you need to work with local startups. So if you're in the recycling space, we'll connect you to the local startups. Because what that allows the startups to do, and this is something we've done really well. So we had one client that basically was in the recycling space trying to explore, the space across the continent. We took them to Ghana. What we did was we organized like a corporate challenge for them. Reason for doing this is this particular company. I think a lot of SMEs now in Germany have this model where they've got more or less like a venture, either a venture studio or a venture sourcing unit in the organization to source for new ideas to improve, their company in general, especially in the technology field. And so we worked with them to source different ideas and innovations around the recycling space. And we did a corporate challenge where we brought together about 10 different startups, not only in Ghana, but across West and East Africa. They actually selected one startup, which at the end of the day got some funding from them and an opportunity to actually pilot with them. So this is like the full spectrum of how we see our work in providing that access. We always want to bridge the gap. At the moment, we are working with also different partners. One of our really strong partners has been the International Sustainable Chemistry Collaboration Center, ISC3, based in Frankfurt. Basically, what we've been doing with them over the past 2-3 years since we got in touch with them is how do we support them also navigate the African continent, especially with their innovation hub, connecting them to startups on the continent and people even with ideas. We launched what is now an African Climate Innovation Challenge. It's been going on for 2 years now. They have been a great supporter to that. We work with, 2 different partners as well as Green Africa Youth Organization and 3Es for Africa, which is based here in Germany. That particular program has allowed us not only work with startups, but work with people just young people at the very idea stage. Because the thing is, beyond just startups who have probably gone to a certain level, they're operating now, even if it's just one person in there, they've got a product and all. You've got the other end of the equation where before you get to that level, you probably had an idea you conceived, right? And out of 1,000 people who have an idea, who conceived, probably only 10 on the African continent actually go to the next stage. And we want to really increase this number, right? So what we are doing with this particular specific, program is we support young people with just an idea, in the climate space. They understand, they live in a certain community, it's very community focused, and then they want to build a solution to support their community and probably also expand it, wider. We sort of have an 8-week program. We take them through, we train them, and then we move on to actually provide them funding as well to go and test. So this is grant financing to go and test whatever it is they want to do. And from there, I told you, we don't just stop there. We now think about, okay, fine, what are the different follow-on supports that we can give? So is it maybe fine, this person probably needs access to a lab to continue testing, right? How can we find the labs here in Europe to actually connect them to test? They need a certain network to be able to do their first test. How can we help do that? So for this particular project, for example, we worked with our partner, I mentioned IAC3, and then we brought some of the finalists from Ghana to Germany to do like a 1-week summer school, with a university based here. And this again is to enrich their own knowledge in the things that they are building. So we tend to want to take the 360 approach of supporting startups and not just leave them on one part just because, hey, you've done your part and then, they need to move on and do the rest. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things of like incubators and accelerators where some of them only take you through one stage and then they expect you to kind of figure everything out yourself after that.
Yeah, no, the thing is hard, it's hard to be able to do the entire thing. Especially also generally because most of them also have different mandates. And, as I mentioned to you, for example, like if you've got a program that is funded by, other lenders who have certain specific interests, you really don't have a lot of wiggle room to think beyond that. And the work, even for just one part, is always very difficult. And sometimes you get stuck in that part and it's really difficult to think about the entire spectrum. But also, in general, we need people who are specialized in these fields, right? We need specialized incubators. We need specialized accelerators. Because if you tend to do the entire spectrum as well, the difficulty you do have is, which is why sometimes for us, we always tend to partner up with people, right? To be able to deliver the full suite. The difficulty you have with that is you tend to then become very staff heavy and you can't afford that as well. So there's always a certain level of compromise you need to make when you're supporting startups.
Yeah, that's true. You can't cater to all needs in one.
No, you can't.
Yeah. So with Startup Lounge Africa focusing on a variety of things like climate change, agriculture, fintech, and mobility, how does the consulting firm seems to cover all these diverse ranges? And how does focusing on these areas align with the vision of re-emerging economics within Africa? And how does this cater to creating sustainable development within Africa as well?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question. The way we think about it. So, ideally, we always start from this is the African continent. As at the moment, the population of over 1.3 billion people. Population distribution is very, very majority young people, which is really cool, which is really, really good. But there is a big gap of access, for young people in general to jobs, to technology, to a lot of different things. And so we sort of sit down and think about, okay, how do we not just necessarily do the work because SDG says you should do it, but we're doing it. How do we do this so that it actually goes down to affect? And of course, comes down to the SDGs at the end of the day, but probably the main focus for us is we need real impact. We need real results. So this is how we take the work that we are doing. And then just from that, you get to see some trends, which is when you look at the development of technology, Africa, as you may know as well, and a lot of people may know, we've leapfrogged a lot of, technologies, right? From, going from, hey, we had the announcing and way of communicating with people all the way to, hey, mobile phones, right? We didn't go through the fax and all those different things.
Yeah.
So you could see clearly that technology is one thing that helps Africa become at par with other people or globally as well, with the global north. This is one part. So technology is a key thing. On top of that is technology opens up access to a lot of different things. At the moment, you've got young people in Africa who are technology savvy, working with, remotely with other businesses across the world. The way we are working most of the time is always around this. And then now we come down to, okay, fine. So if we're doing this, then how can we do it in such a way that it actually benefits, everyone else? And these are some of the things we think about. I'm just trying to think through your first initial question. Could you repeat that so that I can actually get in a point I'm trying to make?
So the first one was about how does the firm itself deal with catering to those climate, agriculture, fintech, and mobility? How do you go about catering to those diverse?
Yes, it's good. No, thank you for reminding me of that, because I'm going a bit off tangent. No, so yeah, I mean, in general, we've got this 4 focus, right? We've got the climate focus, we've got the financial services and fintech focus, we've got the agri focus, and then we've got the mobility focus. For us, these are future-proof sectors for the African continent, especially. As I mentioned, 1.2 billion, 1.3 billion people in 2050, according to the World Bank, it's going to increase to 2.5 billion people. It means movement is going to happen within the continent. So mobility is really key. If you look at a lot of government at the moment on the African continent, you could see that mobility is becoming a big topic for most of them, especially e-mobility. So there's the mobility, and then there's the climate aspect of it as well, which is more or less a focus for a lot of business, should be a focus of a lot of businesses, a lot of governments, sorry. Generally, the reason for this is when it comes to climate, Africa produces less or contributes less to greenhouse gases emissions in general, but Africa suffers the most.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a very no-brainer for us to think about how do we do this, right? So for us, the way we contribute to this whole climate space is one, B2B connections is a big part of it. So we identify businesses from here that already have strong technology, want to enter into the market, then we connect them to local businesses on the continent to be able to do one, technology exchange, knowledge exchange, but also really do real business, right? In that sense. When it comes to the finance side as well, we do most of the time work across the fields of fintech mostly. So we supported some fintech companies to actually do tests from one African country to the other. Mostly this is what we've done so far. But the one thing that we've also seen is, the lack of finance in general, which is also making sure that we're bridging the gap between, just the money that exists here. There's one event I went to in Berlin, that basically they were saying that there's a lot of money chasing projects in Germany and that they can't find some projects. And I'm like, hey guys, then what are you doing here with the money? Bring it down, so
it's
we
a
also
problem to have.
Literally, it's a really nice problem to have, Europe has a very nice problem, there's a lot of money chasing things and then they are not finding it. But the converse is in Africa where you've got, there's a lot of projects coming up every day. Then there's no money to fund it, So these are some of the things, reimagining the way financing works. So at this particular event, the question I really posed was, if we see clearly that at the early stages, there is not just enough financing going at the early stages of the funnel for startup and startup founders, why don't we repurpose a lot of the finance we do have, which is in millions, going either government to government or going maybe sort of development cooperation to big corporate, repurpose this sort of financing and then focus some bits, because some of the time it's not a lot of money startups really do need. It's like 50K, 100K USD, and then it can take them to a certain level, even if it's just for 12 months, it takes them far, right? And that allows you time to be able to prove the model. Because no startup in this world started from day one and then they proved the model. They needed time to prove the model. And sometimes people just don't have the luxury of time. Hence the stats that says 80 to 90% of startups, fail across the, African continent. So sometimes it's not because there are bad ideas on your continent or the ideas don't really have what it takes to survive, right? It's just, they just don't have the luxury of time to prove the model as other people do have. So this is also something that we would do in the climate space is, of course, the project I mentioned to you, but also, I mean, we've seen a lot of work. We've done a lot of work in the climate space, either from a project perspective or also from like a supporting businesses perspective. There's one particular, network that was launched in Berlin, which we're working closely with the Westerwelle Foundation to see how we support them also interact with the African continent, because it's an energy network between Berlin and Africa. Right. So we're really working and identifying the spaces where the conversations are not happening, and we are trying to push in the conversations, to make Africa, bring Africa on the map, but also to not necessarily say, hey, Africa is here, we need help. No, but rather, there's a lot of opportunity for Africans and for the people who want to invest in Africa as well. So both ways it works. And sometimes you might not necessarily see this, but sometimes there's actually opportunity also for African businesses in the European market.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes people don't necessarily tend to pay attention to this. And I give you a clear example, which is at the moment, and I may be wrong, but from my research, Germany alone have got about up to 1 million people in the African diaspora as a population, out of the 80 odd million people Germany has, right? This particular population, together with other diaspora population alone, outnumber the amount of funding that goes on the African continent. So I'm talking about remittances here. And the point I'm trying to make is we actually worked with one particular startup based in Ghana that was trying to access this particular market. And you generally see the interest from the African diaspora community for businesses and startups across the continent as well. So there is a lot of interesting things that can happen, that should happen. And so for us, this is the way we are trying to work around them.
Yeah, that's true. I think Africa is ready. It's just the resources that need to be directed to Africa in order to get it to a point where everyone is somewhat thriving to a degree. Yeah. So
and sometimes redirect. So I just what you said, because there's a lot of money directed to Africa. There's a lot of projects, to be honest. There's a lot of things. If you've worked in the development cooperation space or development funding space, there's a lot of money being put on the African continent. But I think it's about time to think about repurposing it. And I think this is where still there's much work to be done. How do we repurpose funding? How do we repurpose remittance, for example, to actually let it go the way it's supposed to go and actually have the impact it's supposed to have?
Do you think one of the issues with that is that there's a lack of somewhat of checks and balances in place with regards to that money that goes into African continents?
My theory is my theory is mainly a lot of the time, and don't quote me anywhere, probably people will be listening to this. A lot of the time, development funding is only looking for reports at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And well, you can't blame them, because at the end of the day, there is also some level of targets and metrics that needs to be met. But I think we need to move a little bit away from the 50-page report projects and start to think about the real impact these projects have. Because a lot of the time, you've heard this, and I've also heard this. We want to reach 5,000 jobs in a year, and I'm like, if you're not necessarily building a factory and you want to just do training, how can you reach 5,000 jobs a year? So there's so much rethinking we need to do. I think the checks and balances sometimes are even a bit much, to be honest. There's way too much checks and balances, especially when it comes to development funding. And I think that may be also a reason why growth is a bit stifled, because there are a lot of hoops that implementers of this particular funding need to jump through to be able to get the money. And at the time of getting the money, there's a lot of things that had already gone wrong, you know? And so maybe just rethinking the checks and balances so that it's as effective as possible and it is actually serving the right purpose will be something that I would propose.
Yeah, that's true. I think a reform to a degree needs to somewhat happen. So Africa is a diverse continent, because each country has its own economic policies that you have to follow. How do you guys tailor your operations within those different countries?
The way we generally would work and continue to work is we tend to always work with partners, generally because, and we also advise a lot of businesses that we sort of consult with, same. Like, don't just jump on a plane and go to Africa and think everything will work out, you know? So we tend to, even though we're legally registered in Ghana, at the moment, my co-founder, Nicholas, is at the moment traveling across East Africa. And what we are trying to do is we are engaging government authorities. We are engaging local players, just to generally understand the market. You need to be able to do this to fully get a grasp of what's happening, because policy changes so fast on the continent. Sometimes you probably might not fully appreciate how it changes on certain topics, of course. But on certain topics, policy does not change at all. You know, so really there's a lot that especially when it comes to just the startup ecosystem in general. Nigeria is a really good example of the CBN saying, hey, banks don't work with crypto companies. And the next year or two comes to say, okay, fine, we want to engage with crypto companies to understand how we can support. We don't know what's happening now, but there's different things that's also happening. At the moment in Ghana, crypto is probably not a topic of discussion at all. So even in just West Africa, there's already very, very divergent views when it comes to the authorities on the same topic, right? And so it's really important that when you are building, or for us as well, when we are supporting businesses, we definitely want to get in touch with the local authorities, local partners, to understand what's permissible, what's not permissible, because that's the only way you can get clarity on doing the kind of business you want to do, because you don't want to do something, launch something, and at the end of the day, you get cut off by authorities because of a certain policy you didn't have a clear understanding of. So I would definitely push on local partnerships, working with local people on the ground, working with local authorities, engaging them. Of course, not. So I think I need to caution this. I have had experiences of a lot of businesses from Europe actually always engaging with only government officials and taking their promises as the truth and nothing else but the truth. And then getting on the plane to the countries and realizing that maybe this was not a good idea. You know, so I think from a policy perspective, the government authorities are the best place to actually, engage. But from a business perspective, you need to engage local private sector players. These are the ones who can actually tell you what's on the ground.
Yeah, because they have lived in experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Policymakers have policy experience where they're not actually physically there. So it's two different things. So I just want to touch on the fact that you refer to you building this B2B community. How does fostering collaboration among stockholders contribute to building and self-sustaining African businesses that can grow beyond just Africa itself?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the B2B thing is still a topic on my heart and a very interesting topic. So we actually, beyond just bringing businesses together, we thought this is something that would flourish in a sense. And the reason behind this is, initially when we started, there was a lot of the time where you got people to say, hey, I'm looking for this person in Nigeria, or I'm looking to do this in Nigeria. Do you know any business that I can partner up with in Nigeria to help me do this? Oh, I'm looking for this. I'm looking for that. Can you help? So ideally, we thought just beyond us reaching out and collecting a list of people and always, sending across, why don't we build a platform? So we went beyond the just mainly connecting and just building a community by, either a list or something of that. So we actually built a platform to facilitate this. And what we realized, and probably it's because maybe we didn't do it the way we were supposed to do it, but in general, what we realized was it didn't work. People didn't use it, at the end of the day. And people probably did like the personal, very customized approach to finding partners rather than a whole glossary approach to finding partners. What we've learned from this experience is definitely B2B partnerships is the one thing that can actually help businesses survive cross-border. Because the way the African continent works, it's not as simple as, being in Germany and working with somebody in Netherlands and you are sure that everything goes as planned because Europe is really connected. The African continent is connected in its own way, but it has so many different challenges when it comes to doing business cross-border. And so just being sure of the next person on the other end of the phone or the Zoom call who is saying, hey, I can do this and I can deliver this to you, is something that is always, questioned. And also the continent's it's a bit more on the trust side, is a very low trust society. And there are different factors to why it's like this, in general. And so building B2B communities actually help businesses thrive. Markets across the continent probably are somewhat diverse, but also a bit similar. The interesting thing about building B2B communities from our perspective has been that Ghana has 30 million people, Nigeria has over 200 million people. Just by doing a connection with one business in Ghana to Nigeria, the Ghanaian business can access a lot of numbers, right? If they want to do business in Nigeria, for example, and when you play the numbers game, you could see the potential of it when it just keeps growing like that. Of course, there's a lot of other things that needs to be done from an infrastructural perspective, from the payments perspective, from different kinds of connections perspective. But in general, the potential for business growth, the potential for general economic growth by connecting these two kind of communities and just beyond the different communities that need to be connected. We've seen that there's just so much that can be done, and there's so much potential in that.
Yeah. I think for both continents there's a lot of potential. And to touch on the notion of potential, how can fostering this collaboration between Europe and Africa lead to growth between both regions?
Yeah. So I guess I can use the strategy of the German government as a play here, because the German government now says Africa is our partner on eye level, in that sense. And I think this is a very good position to take. Because at the end of the day, if you are always coming to the continent with a certain mindset that Africa needs help, then you are not able to fully explore and understand, the potential it has for your continent. Right. Now let's take Europe, for example. Europe at the moment, by 2030, or even just generally from now upwards, general businesses, may not be able to fill up to, a minimum of one role, just in general, because there are no people to work in these companies and the numbers are dwindling, right? What that means for Europe is they need to look within or look without Europe to be able to find people that can work within their industries to keep powering their industry, right? This is one clear way of leveraging the partnership with the African continent to be able to fill the European industry, right? So I'm talking about, labor exploitation and stuff like that, but in a very sustainable way. On the other end as well, I mean, there's always the topic of capital and how it can be used on the continent, right? So Europe fortunately has a lot of that. And so African continent can actually benefit from how this capital is repurposed, not necessarily as a debt like what Ghana is doing with the IMF, but more how do we have a certain kind of agreement where we are taking something from Africa and Africa is taking something from us. I think this is the kind of, I guess, partnership that Germany is trying to have with the African continent. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that is unfolding every now and then through the different projects and funding activities that's going on the continent. But in general, I think this is just a clear example of how both parties could benefit when it comes to, the whole continent connection.
Yeah, that's true. So we've been speaking a lot about the potential that Africa has and the potential growth that it has. What role do you think a thriving startup scene within the African continent can play in terms of catering to this growth that's potentially there?
Jobs. And I say this so many times because I think we need to fully grasp what a thriving startup community has done for other continents. I don't think the African continent has fully grasped that yet. Private sector is doing amazing, of course, but what you have with private sector is private sector has grown to a certain point where there is always a limit. Private sector cannot necessarily grow to employing 50,000 people within a matter of a year. Startups can do that. Just the general build of startups can literally move from within 3 months can move from 3 people to 1,000 people. And this is a clear opportunity that we tend to miss, and we are missing on a regular basis on the African continent when it comes to the startup community, and how we are not even necessarily putting a lot of money, even as African investors actually as well, putting a lot of money in the startup community, because there's so much you could gain from that. There's so much development funding can gain from that. If and I say this very carefully actually as well. So if the true aim is to really reach the target of 5,000 jobs, there's so much you can gain. You can gain from putting probably like 1 million or so, which is less than what you would put in a private sector company in one startup or in 2-3 startups, and you can see just the rapid growth in businesses or in tech companies across the continent. Unfortunately, this is not happening, but I think slowly the changes in mindset on how especially development funding is treating startups. For me, I think it's a positive turn of events, to be honest, because now you see that there are a lot more funding trying to structure themselves to focus on startup. But then you always do have these caveats. You need to have 2 years audited accounts. And I'm like, this is a startup. Come on. Yes, it's part of the entire, this is how the funding is structured. And so it's very difficult to leave it alone. But, the thing is, hey, there's ways of dealing with it. You could probably just put the money into other VCs that are already investing in the continent and allow them take care of the money if you think the money will go waste by just going straight into startups, right? There are different models that people are exploring. I think just the whole caveat that we put on startup financing is not actually helping startups be able to do the work. And another caveat I think I've seen a lot of the time is, hey, we'll not give you the money, but we need you to spend the money on these things alone. And so give us receipt and we'll pay for them. Like, startups need money that is flexible to be able to do the things they do, because the one thing they were doing, for example, like 2 days ago, something could just happen and then that can change the trajectory immediately, but that could lead to the certain growth they need to get to. But if you do not understand this entire thesis of startup growth, you miss it by saying, okay, fine, hey, the funding was structured for this. You've changed the model, and so the funding is no more for you anymore. Then you just lose out.
Yeah. The moment you lock the potential of that company or that startup.
Yeah.
When you tell them you can only do this with this money. Yeah. So that is a downside of certain funding where you're getting into.
Unfortunately. Yeah.
So as Africa undergoes this swift transition between economies from agriculture, extraction to services, there exists this productivity gap with other regions still. So how can, as a continent, how can Africa bridge this gap and leverage the potential that it currently has with having one of the youngest populations around the world? How can we solve that situation?
So it's a really big question. I think we need to. It's a hard question to answer because ideally we should have the solution already. Because if you look at the entire spectrum, if people are moving, they need trains. Yeah. So it's a no-brainer to start educating people on how to build trains. Right. If more and more markets are coming up trying to move the first level of farm produce into something like, either processed, semi-processed, then you need that level of machinery. You don't just turn to China and order them, right? You need that level of machinery. So you probably need to start training people for that. Right. And I'm saying this because it's not that it's not happening. There are a lot of engineers across the continent who've studied electrical engineering, who've studied a lot of sort of different levels of engineering. There are a lot of vocational training schools, across the continent, teaching people to build stuff. But I think the level of influence the service industry has had is where the problem is. Not necessarily the problem is where the gap exists, because I don't think it's a problem per se, because again, people still need to work and then make money, right? And that's a no-brainer. But there is so much money to be made in this gap, but it's so interesting that nobody is looking at this. Up until I think recently, when I think GIZ also did something in TVET in Ghana and training people on mechanics, for example, just standardizing was the name, the work of a mechanic on the continent. This is something that has not been thought about since, and it was only thought about when we heard that most of the OEM players were launching assembly lines on the continent, and so now there's a need for it. So I think there are different, factors, right? So there is the definite factor of, when I have the skill, where is the end of it? As opposed to when I study and want to do a bank job, it's obvious that there's a bank somewhere lying around and I can actually go and apply, right? But when I study and then I become a mechanic, my best bet is working with a master somewhere who probably hasn't also gone to school and has climbed up the ladder and is doing something on the corner somewhere. And so this is probably my trajectory. But I think that the trajectory should change, and it will change. Our involvement as young people is really important. But we need an off-taker of these skills. And that off-taker, well, fortunately or unfortunately, is coming from OEM players outside the continent, what basically means that the money also goes outside the continent, right? So we need players that should be employed locally to be able to take on these skills and employ these skills en masse to be able to do whatever it is that needs to be done, because there's a lot of money that needs to be made. There's a lot of things that is needed for these sort of, like there's so many specific tools and machinery that needs to be created on the continent for different processes that are being done on the continent. Yeah. We sat down for China to create a Gary processing machine to send to Ghana. And Gary is not made in China, So Gari, I don't know if you're familiar with Gari from Southern Africa, but then Gari is made out of cassava, and cassava is like a root tuber. And what you do is that you probably would manually, the way we made Gari in Ghana was you first, you harvested the cassava, you peeled it out, you washed it, and then you basically had to grind it. And then, because sometimes it's very moist, you have to dry the water out of it, and then sometimes shake it, sieve it a little bit. And the process goes on until, you get the fine Gari, which becomes like it's a staple food across West Africa. Just, you can use it for breakfast, lunch, dinner. Like, look at the amount of people you are feeding just by building a proper Gari processing machineries, company, for example. So I think as young people, these are some of the things we need to start thinking about. The service industry is very interesting. It's very attractive, in a sense. But when you get inside, you get to see that, okay, fine, maybe it's not as attractive as I thought, right? Because the standard of living is going so high. Your payment is still the same, but when we start to think about what are the low hanging fruits, the things that are right now obvious that are there, that people need support in processing, and how can I, solve that particular problem? I think this is what we need to get to as young people.
Yeah. I think I was at a conference once, and it was, is agriculture attractive? With people more moving into fintech?
It's crazy. Like, I think that question shouldn't even be asked in the first place, because if you talk to anybody who's actually done agric, they can tell you for a fact that, hey, I'm making a lot of money in it.
Yeah.
I think the reason why that question is asked is it is asked in comparison to always the service industry. And so when you put it side by side, well, at a glance, you would always say, oh, I mean, I'm not bending now with a hoe and a cutlass. So, the service industry is more attractive, isn't it?
Yeah. It's really a shift. So
yeah.
The economic growth in Africa is somewhat not uniformed, which is one of the issues that kind of Africa faces. Different regions have different growth trajectories. What strategies would you implement to kind of create a more inclusive growth trajectory within the African continent itself?
I think the AFCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade area, is, for me, I buy into it because I buy into the logic and the philosophy behind it, right? This is the one thing that can move the African continent. And I was reading a report from Afri-Exim Bank, and they were doing sort of a potential of the whole free trade area being fully ratified and actually being implemented. And you could see just a leap within a year or two in terms of this trade value on the African continent doubling, right? And that alone says a lot. Of course, within the African countries, it's very difficult at the moment to think about a one all-encompassing policy or strategy that can connect. I think there was a time that could have happened easily, but that didn't happen. At the moment, there is just so much interest from the general individual countries, which are not aligning. And maybe also, I may be wrong, but I think there's also so much, I use damage very loosely. There's so much damage that has been done by foreign partners, which makes it very, very, very difficult for the African countries to look within themselves for certain things, right? The reason why I say this is you sometimes would have Ghana having a certain level of bilateral agreements with Germany. You have Nigeria having a bilateral agreement with another country. You've got Togo doing the same thing with another country. You've got, Southern Africa having, so you've got so many different agreements and very, 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 very strong, deep rooted agreement by these different countries legally. And it's very difficult to circumvent all these things to create a certain level of, cohesion. But I think I still stand on the fact that the philosophy and ideology behind the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is one thing that can change the trajectory of the African continent for good, like for real good. If our leaders rethink the future with this particular agreement in place, I think there's a lot of things that will change. Like it will be a no-brainer. Ghana will not have to borrow money anymore from anywhere, right? Most African countries will not have to borrow money anymore from anywhere because you've been opened up to a market of 1.2 billion people.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot you can do with that. There's a lot you can do with that, and there's a lot of leeway you can have with that as well. So, I mean, these are some of the things that I personally, think about. Yeah.
Yeah. Continental trade is a big thing. Make it easier for people within the continent to trade with each other. It's a game changer.
100. Yeah, 100.
We're going to move into some of the projects that Startup Lounge has implemented. The first one we're going to touch on is KutanaPay. So to explore KutanaPay, what motivated the creation of this project and what value does it underpin with this innovation?
So KutanaPay came up as I would say it came up as a motivation from our work in Startup Lounge Africa. We started off, working with a lot of SMEs and businesses, and then the thing about, as I mentioned, the B2B connections became something that we thought, hey, this is a problem we wanted to solve, right? And we went on, we built a platform, and then we saw that maybe this is not a pressing problem. It exists, yes, it's there, but it's not a pressing problem for businesses. They still find their ways of doing whatever it is they want to do. The thing that became much interesting for us is we started speaking to these businesses who had signed up initially on the platform to understand, hey, why are you not using it? What's the problem? But in general as well, we asked a very important question, which was, what are some of the main challenges that you face at the moment? And immediately we realized a trend, which was the lack of trust across the continent, especially when it comes to making payment for goods and services. And, just making sure the other person on the end, because I have had, I've had an experience, I don't want to do it again. And some people have gone to the extent of they've had an experience where they've had to stop their business. They are not doing it anymore. And if you look at just how do you say, if you look at the reality of a lot of local businesses, especially those at the bottom of the pyramid, what's happening generally is if they go through this one hit, it's probably the last one they can handle, and so business definitely comes to a halt because probably they put in a lot of savings. Even if it's just $500, there's a lot of savings for them to be able to do this particular one transaction, to go on and sell and make money for themselves and keep the cycle going. So for us, this was very crucial and this was very important. This is why we decided, hey, we needed to find a solution that actually tackles this particular challenge for local businesses. So KutanaPay became a real game changer in a sense. For us, we believe this is a real game changer, especially for local businesses and local traders at the bottom of the pyramid. Beyond just the idea of trust and then maybe falling prey to fraud. You've got these people again at the bottom of the pyramid who just don't have access to, or who are not financially included in general. And this is a big problem because most of these guys are actually the ones contributing to over 60 to 70% of the bucket of the entire continent's GDP, right? Because these guys are doing, if you could understand the amount of trade and the amount of volume these guys are doing just on sitting down at the market, buying here, selling this, there and there, you'll be amazed. You will be amazed. So how do we include them so that they can actually be empowered to access things like credit, and all those things. So these are some of the things that we are thinking about with KutanaPay. But at the moment, really, the problem we've solved is the problem of trust, which is the first layer, right? The problem of trust. which is one of the most important things that we are trying to solve. So just as a, summary, we've built this payment, platform, which allows users to leverage, escrow agreements to be able to do business across the continent.
So you touched on the notion of security being one of the biggest concerns since it's transition, it's money being moved. How do you go about with regards to security and people's concerns about that? How do you safeguard that notion?
Yeah. So the way we built the platform, we did it. So I mean, first of all, I mean, the way it would happen from a security concern perspective is if I send money to someone who says, so for example, I find you, O'Brien, I find you on Instagram, right? I'm trying to start my own small online shop. I need a pair of, 60 bags. You are selling so many bags on wholesale. I find you, we chat on Instagram, and then you say, hey, I mean, this is my account, send the thing. I would only send the stuff if you show proof of payment, right? So I go ahead and make a payment. I show you proof of payment. A month later, nothing comes. I message you. I see that your Instagram thing is deleted. So, then I understand what has happened. Then I'm cool. I'm cool. Okay, fine. That's good. It happened to me. Right. So the way we are trying to solve this is we then take me and say, hey, you want to make payment to O'Brien. This is the best way we think you can do it to make sure that you are safeguarding yourself and making the payment secure. Give us O'Brien's details. Pay the money to us. We hold it in trust. Tell us how you want us to make the payment to O'Brien. Of course, you and O'Brien had already had a discussion. Hey, O'Brien, just for the show of faith, I've made this payment. Here is the payment proof. These guys will get in touch with you to make, to follow up on the rest. Right. So O'Brien, at least you are also secured. You know that the money definitely is not sitting with them. It's sitting with another person. And that's a trusted, financial institution that can support, when you need your money, for example. So we've solved the problem for Samuel. For O'Brien as well, that at least, the money is there, has been paid. Right. So assuming O'Brien is a very legitimate supplier. Right. So now O'Brien will go ahead and send the stuff. And once stuff is sent, depending on the agreement, maybe the agreement is pay 50% upfront, and then the remaining 50% you pay it when I receive the stuff. So O'Brien will send the stuff, has already received his 50%, confirmed he's received his 50%, so the transaction is ongoing, it's legitimate, right? And after that, once someone says, hey, I've received it, you can pay the rest. We go ahead and make the remaining payment to O'Brien. Throughout this transaction, there is no room for, hey, I can't find the person again. My money is gone forever. Your money is not gone forever, because if the person doesn't send it, then the money is not moving. The money is sat there. If the transaction doesn't go through, if the person does not send it true upon the agreed point in time that you're supposed to receive it, money is transferred back to you. You have your money back. Right. So this is the idea behind it. And so for us, at the end of the day, we know the next step would be to start to also onboard trusted suppliers. Of course, 100%. But at the moment, what we are focusing on is really drilling down on building the infrastructure that allows people to transact safely. Right. And we think just having this particular escrow bits of every payment across the continent would help with this secure payment and transaction. And also in general, we are able to make sure that nobody gets defrauded, because at the end of the day, the money is not sitting in your account, it's sitting in our account. And so when it comes to reconciliation and conflict resolution, it's just a matter of, he didn't send it. Okay, fine. He didn't send it. We confirm. We can't even get in touch with him again. Time is up. Money is sent back to the person who initiated the transaction, and then we close the transaction.
That's good. And no transaction without actual proof of funds being transferred through the other person, which is good. Yeah. Now to touch on your other project, Esperanto, can you provide us with an overview of how Esperanto became a project and what inspired its creation?
Yeah. So as Esperanto started off as we got a client from the south of France. that said, hey, we've just got funding from the French government. We want to explore the African continent. And so we went on and do so our normal steez will be, we'll speak to the client. We'll provide a certain level of, market overview report. We find them local partners. We do virtual meetings, and then physical meetings, take them there. Right. So we did, all these, and then we explored what kind of product would be interesting for the market. Right. And interestingly, for this particular client, this client was one of the, I wouldn't say largest, but at least one of the large and middlemen to most of the solar equipment producers. Right. And so what they would typically do is they would take the solar product, and then they will market it and then sell it on behalf of the producers. Right. And so this was a typical, kind of, plan that we had. So we took them to the African continent, especially precisely Ghana. And we met local partners who were some distributors in Ghana who were also very interested in the product. But we as a company saw this as an opportunity to just go beyond consulting. And this is always something that we tend to do. So we pick our client very, very, cautiously, because we tend to be involved for the long haul. And so we decided to explore this beyond just talking to local distributors. What are the use cases for this particular product? And Esperanto, as you've seen, it is more or less like it's a battery storage unit that's basically can have many use cases, like you're plugging in your TV, plugging in your phone to charge, and it's very portable as well. And it comes with a sort of supplementary, what's the name, solar panel, right? And it's comes with a modular approach as well. So there's a 80-watt battery, there's a 160-watt battery, which generally what that means is, you've got that amount of energy to be able to put in whatever device you're using. Of course, there are specific devices you could use, and the input and output, devices we can explain later, but this is just the technical part. But that ideally it was perfect for the African markets, generally because, one, for Ghana, for example, Ghana definitely doesn't have a problem with energy production. The problem Ghana has is with distribution of the energy. So the reason why you find a lot of load shedding is not because we've not produced enough energy. We've got actually enough energy, but the distribution of the energy costs more than, so more than the amount you make from, the energy you distribute. And so sometimes it's really tricky. That's why energy does not also get close to the rural areas. So this particular project started off as a client engagement, and then now we are basically the ones we are ones actually implementing the project on the African continent, especially on West and East Africa. We are also at the moment going to be working with the producer of this particular Esperanto itself, and is SolarWorks. For them, they call it the Solergo, right? And SolarWorks actually is in Berlin. And so we have been working closely with SolarWorks to basically, understand how we can actually distribute this Esperanto to provide electricity for places where there are no electricity. And so, ideally what we are trying to do here is work with development finance partners, to work with just NGOs that are already in these areas, but also to work on with private sector players to support just households, companies, with access to electricity. So not only in West Africa, but also in East Africa as well. And we've been already exploring Zambia and a few other places in making this happen.
Yeah, which is good. So you spoke on the notion of how you are bringing power to rural areas. Can you shed light on how this innovation is contributing to sustainable development?
Yeah. The first thing we can already say is how do you say, is green, right? The solution is climate friendly. We're tapping the sun, and for Ghana and for many sub-Saharan African countries, you've got sun up to or even more than 12 hours a day, right? Which is most of the battery needs charges after 2-3 hours is fully charged, right? And when it's fully charged, you can use it directly, so DC during the day, and so you're just using the power that comes on the solar panel straight into your device, and then during the night you've got a full 80-watt battery that can last you, depending on what you're using, the whole night, right? This for us is tapping on so many different layers of the SDGs, right? So beyond just it being green and the solution itself being very innovative from a technological perspective, it actually is connecting rural areas to different opportunities, because without electricity, you literally don't have a lot to do, right? But with electricity, people can actually study at night, from school. People can people can be able to also do other extracurricular activities that improves their livelihood, just because they have access to electricity. People have access to information, which is really, really important as well. So it's touching on so many layers of the SDGs from our perspective.
Which is good. So as we get to the end of our conversation, I just want to get like one piece of information from you. So looking ahead, how do you envision the future of startups within the African continent? And what role can collaboration, digitalization, and talent development play in accelerating the growth? And how does Startup Lounge Africa contribute to shaping this future?
That's a really big question, yeah? Looking ahead, to be honest, I am more optimistic about the startup ecosystem on the continent. Generally because we moved from just description of startups being big tech companies into real startups, and real startups in the sense of very, very young companies run by young people, being funded, and also, attracting a lot of funding, but most importantly, solving huge problems that they are facing in either in their countries or even just across the African continent. I know people tend to say that, especially in the fintech space, it's saturated, but I don't think so at all. I think we've just scratched the surface of unlocking financial inclusion with technology. And I see a lot more startup founders rethinking, some of the solutions they have or innovations they have in the finance space as well, because we need to move. To be honest, it can't be that we would always have the traditional bank system forever. Of course, it's going to exist no matter what, right? But then I think there are so many layers to traditional banking, and those layers will be taken over by technology, either by the banks themselves or mostly by younger companies, younger technology companies that are doing amazing work. Because you've got so many banks, you've got so many seemingly saturated fintech space, but you still have just a sizable amount of people who don't have access to finance and financial inclusion, who are still saving in a box, who are still digging holes on the ground to save money. So there's still a lot of work to be done in the health space. Oh God, there's so much work to be done in health. We're just scratching the surface on health. On mobility, which I believe is really one of the biggest markets that's still fully untapped yet on the continent. There's so much work that needs to be done in that space. These are, and I think the biggest one is, of course, the food basket itself. Africa is just producing a lot of food, and I'm looking forward to more, not just software focused technologies, but hardware focused technologies in the food industry built by Africans. Right? I think this is something that would really be transformative as well. So from that side, I would say that there's a huge potential on the African continent in the startup ecosystem. We definitely need to encourage more younger people, and especially also female, to be a part of this whole, ecosystem and building the ecosystem. But we also need to move beyond now probably the big seven, but I think it was first the big five countries, right? So Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, Kenya, you've got also Tunisia. There are so many other African countries, that needs some lights to be on them. So like we're really scratching the surface on this whole startup ecosystem thing. Private sector has not been able to fully go deep into all these other countries to do the work that needs to be done. I believe startups are the ones who are going to be doing this sort of, real impact, real transformation of the economy. Our work at Startup Lounge Africa will remain, moving forward, will remain as is, right? Building the bridge and filling the gaps that needs to be filled in terms of knowledge, in terms of technology, in terms of finance, on the continent. And so wherever the money is, we want to look for it and then find it. Wherever the knowledge is, we want to be able to be there to connect and bridge the gap. For us, this is the goal for us, and this is going to be the goal for a long time, because we know that this is the only way that we can provide access to the continent.
And that's it from us. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you.
This was quite an interesting conversation.